friends. Today we're going to start a new series, and so I thought I would tell you about the character who wrote this letter that Bevan is going to preach about later. I remember when I was a child receiving a book for a birthday or Christmas, a little ladybird book, and it was called Peter the Fisherman. And this book told the story about a big, quite rough, physical looking guy called Peter. And I remember the different Bible verses that taught us about him. In Matthew's Gospel, chapter 4, Jesus is walking on the beach of the Sea of Galilee, and he sees two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew. And Jesus says to them, "Come and follow me." And then he says to them something really strange. He says, "I'm going to make you fishers of men." And this really got my imagination going as a child. A little bit later, we hear about a band of disciples that Jesus had called together. And one of the main ones, the ones who stood out, was this man called Peter. In Mark's Gospel, chapter 8, Jesus and his disciples are on their way to Caesarea Philippi, which is a fair walk, sort of northeast of Galilee, where they were fishermen. And Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" And the disciples are talking, "Well, somebody says you're John the Baptist, another one says you're Elijah." But it is Peter. He's the one who says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Peter's life takes a bit of a twist and a turn, and you'll see in this picture of the fisherman in the net what some people thought Peter looked like. At the end of the gospel story, when Jesus has been arrested, we expect something brave of Peter, but we're disappointed, because in Luke 22, 3 times outside the place where Jesus was being tried, people recognized him and said, "Aren't you one of the people who were walking around with Jesus? Aren't you somebody who knew him?" And 3 times he says, "No, I didn't know him. I don't know who you're talking about." And so we become very disappointed with Peter. There's another beautiful time in the Bible, in John's Gospel this time, in chapter 21, where Jesus meets Peter and the disciples again on the beach of the Sea of Galilee. They have gone out fishing, and Jesus calls out from the shore to them on the boat, way far away in the lake. And he says, "Why don't you throw your net out on the other side of the boat?" And they throw it out, and yes, a carpenter, Jesus, who knows very little about fishing, teaches fishermen how to fish, because the net is so full. And then on the beach he says to Simon Peter, you can imagine how embarrassed Peter would have been. He says, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter says, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." 3 times he says this, once for every time Peter denied him. And Peter is made ready again to lead in God's church. The last thing I want to tell you, and this little picture here, Peter holds the keys in his hand. And it's something that comes from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 16, where Jesus says to him, "You are Peter," Petros, the Greek meaning rock, "and on this rock I will build my church." And then he gives Peter the keys. It's not real keys, but he says, "Peter, if you forgive someone, they are forgiven. If you don't forgive them, they are not forgiven." And traditionally we call this the keys of the kingdom. Forgiveness is the way you get into God's kingdom. So this is the beginning of a series on Peter the fisherman, who became Peter the rock on which Jesus built his church.